What's up, everyone? I'm Travis, and you're watching Upgraded RC. So here we are, video number 4 of our top 5 upgrades to the Axial ACX10iii and ACX10iii JT Gladiator, which is what this beautiful thing is here. Okay guys, in this video number 4, we're going to be discussing and performing shock upgrades. This is going to consist of us changing out to a heavier weight shock oil. We're also going to change out to a stiffer coil on the springs. And then we're going to go ahead and set the preload to the correct preload height. So gaining access to your shock is pretty easy. All you got to do is remove your tire and wheel, and then on your shock right here, you've got an Allen on the top and you've got an Allen on the bottom. Now when you remove the Allen from the bottom, you're also removing the Allen that holds up this rear link right here. No big deal, just go ahead and let it drop down. When you put your shock back on, go ahead and make sure you put it back in the same relationship or the same direction it was in. You'll have no problems at all. So the first step in doing this is to go ahead and remove this little Allen here at the bottom of your spring retaining clip. You pull that Allen out, pull your spring up, and just push the retaining clip off of the shaft like so. Then go ahead and remove your spring. Now we've got just the shock shaft with the shock body and the shock cap. So all you're going to do is grab your shock body on the bottom here and go ahead and twist that cap off. It shouldn't be that tight. If it is, go ahead and put a rag on your body here and some pliers, and don't squeeze very tight at all, just enough to be able to loosen this cap. Once you get your cap off of there, you'll notice it's full of fluid inside. Go ahead and tip this upside down, and we're going to cycle this back and forth to get that fluid out. I would do this for do this for a minute or so. We're trying to get all that old fluid out. Now, if you were going to completely rebuild your shocks, I would just go ahead and take everything apart and clean it really good and then put it back together. But since we're just changing fluid, as long as we get the bulk of our fluid out, it should be okay to go ahead and put a different weight in there. So just cycle that through a couple times, maybe let it sit upside down for a minute. Just try to get some of that out. Okay. So now that we've gotten all of our shock fluid drained out of our shock, there's no more coming out. You can see I got it all in here, catch all my mess. Now we're going to focus our attention on the cap. If you can see this little tiny Allen right here in your cap, that's your bleeder screw. Go ahead and very gently remove that and take a look at this. Look at how small that is. Make sure that you don't lose that. Just go ahead and set it down here. Probably be pretty easy to lose. Okay. So now that we've done that, we can go ahead and put the correct weight fluid back in our shock here, whatever you so decide. So you guys are trying to figure out which shock fluid should I get, which one's going to work best for me. Well, keep a couple things in mind when you're choosing this. Number one, I would only choose a reputable brand shock fluid. Like this is Team Low C. I've got Factory Team here. Oh God, there's all kinds of people who make quality shock fluid. But when you're choosing your shock fluid, make sure it's a silicone-based shock fluid. Okay, that's all you're supposed to be running anyway, but the silicone-based shock fluid will help condition your seals, and it'll keep the inside of your aluminum body conditioned as well. So it makes everything happy, makes it last a little bit longer. Next, now let's talk about, well, which weight should I use? Well, that brings up this question. What type of environment are you in? Is it very cold where you're at? Is it very hot where you're at? Is it summer? Is it winter? And what are you trying to do with this? Are you trying to go across a flat grassy field? Are you trying to climb a monster mountain with lots of ruts in it? How much are you going to be using your suspension? So here's what we go with. So if you live in a place where it's very hot, you can obviously go with a little bit thicker weight oil to compensate for the resistance that you want and the compression that you need. Now, if you live in a colder place, you're going to want to go with a thinner weight oil. Now, the reason being is because if you're someplace where it's really cold and you use a thicker oil, it's going to put more resistance against it, yes, but it's kind of thicker because of the cold. It can't get through the piston holes near as well, so it doesn't seem to work as well. In a colder place, you're going to want to run a thinner weight oil so that as the cold increases, the oil will flow through the holes in your piston a lot easier, which gives you your rebound dampening. It will make it actually work better. So you got to keep that in mind, where you're at, what season it is, and then also, what are you trying to do with it? I mean, I was crawling the other day, and by the way, guys, all the SCX10iiis come stock with 35 weight all the way around, front and rear on every corner. Now, that wasn't quite enough for me. I'm about 85 degrees here right now, and we went crawling, and it just seemed like there wasn't enough resistance on the shocks when I was putting them into a bind or putting a lot of pressure on them. They weren't reacting the way I wanted them to. They were compressing instead of kind of holding itself up to climb up a little bit easier. So what I'm going to do today, and that's what I was thinking about, I'm going to go ahead and put 50 weight all the way around in all my shocks. So I'm going up 15 weight, 15 points, whatever you want to say there. That's not a whole bunch. I may end up going with a 60 or a 70 or even an 80 if that doesn't work for me. Now, as wintertime comes on and it gets colder, I'm going to have to take that oil back out, and I'm going to have to go back to a lighter weight if I want my rebound to work correctly. So keep that in mind. That's kind of how you pick your fluid, is based on what you're trying to do, and the big thing is your environment. So remember that, and go ahead and grab the fluid you need. I'm going to go with 50 all the way around this time. So now we can go ahead and take our shock body here and fill this up with shock fluid. Now this is going to be really, really messy. You might get away with some mess in the first part, but when we're bleeding this out, it's going to be messy. So I would recommend taking a paper towel or a napkin and just kind of wrapping this around the opening here so that as you're bleeding this, it's going to run out and the napkin will take up some of the mess, not all of it. There's still going to be a decent amount of mess. So we got that going on here. We're going to pull our shaft all the way to the very bottom here. And now we're going to go ahead and I'm using 50 weight fluid. So we're going to pour our 50 weight fluid in here almost all the way to the top. Get it really close to the top there. And then go ahead and move your shaft up and down very gently so that you're not spilling it out and making too much of a mess. And we're cycling this back and forth to fill up all the nooks and crannies with the new fluid, and also to get the air bubbles to go to the top that we've just created. So when you get going on that a little bit there, go ahead and put a little bit more in and fill this all the way up to the top now. Now we're going to cycle this a couple more times here, and now we're starting to make a little bit of a mess. We're just going to cycle it a couple times, and then after you get done cycling it, pull your shaft back down to the bottom again. And what I like to do is I've got a 14 millimeter deep well socket here. I'm just going to set this in here, and what we're going to do is we're going to leave that set for about 4 or 5 minutes so that all the bubbles can come up and evaporate out of the oil before we finish this process. Okay, so we've had our shock sitting here for a little while, and all of the air bubbles have risen to the top and escaped. You can almost look all the way to the bottom. It looks crystal clear. I don't see no more air bubbles. So we're ready for the next step. Now here's where I would take and put the napkin back on again. This is going to make a very big mess. There's not really any way around it. So go ahead and wrap your napkin around that pretty good. And what we're going to do, and you don't need to put any more oil in here because it's already full, and what we're going to do is compress this shaft and push more oil out. We're going to bleed this now. So what we're doing is we're pushing down on the shaft, and all that extra oil is going to come out into the napkin and make a mess. So now that you have your shaft fully compressed, make sure it stays compressed. Do not let that open back up. If you have your shaft open back up again and non-compress, it's going to draw air bubbles back down into the oil, and you're going to have to repeat the process that we just did, the previous step. All right, so now if you still have it compressed, go ahead and take your cap here and screw it on top of the shock body very gently while leaving your shaft compressed. Get it on there, don't cross-thread it, and screw that back on nice and tight. Don't get it too tight, but it should be pretty snug. And now, with our shaft still compressed, we're going to go ahead and put our bleeder screw back into the bleeder opening here. Kind of hard to get in there. It's a really small screw. So go ahead and screw that back in. And remember, guys, this is just plastic. You're screwing a metal screw into, so don't strip it out and go too tight. It should be snug so that you're not letting any air back in as it works, but don't strip it out. Okay, wipe that off after you get done. Now you can cycle it back and forth a couple times and feel the resistance. That feels really good. All right, now I want you to notice something. As you push in on your shaft here, watch, it'll push back out. See that? There's a little bit more air trapped inside there that's very difficult to get out, but if you want to try to get some more of that out, you could stand your shock back up and go ahead and take your bleeder screw back out again. Now push back down all the way with your bleeder screw back out, and you'll see a little bit more oil come out. Some more oil, a little bit of air bubbles, and then go ahead and screw it back in again. And once again, don't strip it out, just a nice snug. Okay, now we can go ahead and clean that oil off and clean this up fairly decent so that we can check and make sure everything's tight without our fingers slipping on the oil. All right, so that's it. And you can see we've still got just a little bit there. See how it kicks back out? Just a little bit. But it's very difficult to remove all of that. So that's all you really need to do, and that's how you fill your shocks with oil and bleed them correctly. Let's move on to the next step here after we clean all this off. So we've cleaned up our bench and we put away all the messy shock oil. I've also wiped this down really good so that when I'm cycling this, I can tell right away by looking down here to see if I have a leak, if that O-ring is leaking, or maybe if my bleed screw up here is leaking because I put it in crooked or something like that. So you just kind of wipe it off really good and cycle it to make sure there's no oil leaks or anything, and then you're ready to go. So now we can go ahead and discuss our springs here. And you know, maybe this is something that you don't want to even add right now. You just changed the weight of the fluid in your shocks, so maybe you want to put it on and use the same spring and go try it out and see what the difference is. I've already done these tests. I'm already past that point. So I'm going to go ahead and add stiffer springs. Now this is the second upgrade I've done here on springs. The first one, I took the rear off, which are green, and put them on the front, which were red and they're a little bit softer. So that made the green in the front a little bit stiffer, and then I got stiffer springs for the rear. It didn't quite work out for me. So now I'm going to the stiffest spring that Axial makes, which is the yellow. Now let me show you something here in the stock manual that comes with your kit so you guys can understand what's going on here. All right, so they're giving you a bunch of different options here that you could use for your springs. It does come stock with the red, which they're calling here a soft, and that is 1.3 inch-pounds on that. Now you can get softer. There's one here called extra soft, which is an orange. That's only 1 inch-pound. And then there's even a super soft, which is the purple spring, and that is 0.78 inch-pounds. Now going the other direction, you can come down here to the white, which is, they're calling that a medium, and that's 1.9 inch-pounds. And then you go to the green, which is the first of the firm. And the green is 2.13 inch-pounds. Now this is what you have stock on the back, and the red is what you have stock on the front. Well, I've tried both of those and I've mixed them around a little bit. It didn't seem to work for me. So what I'm doing now is I'm going for the extra firm yellow, which is 2.5 inch-pounds. That's the stiffest coil here that Axial has in their manual. I don't know if there's any stiffer ones or not. I'm sure there's an aftermarket company that makes something a little bit better. But when you're trying to figure this out, all these springs are black. And then, I don't know if you can see this or not. See that little bit of green right there? That is showing you that this is the green spring. This is the one that comes stock on the back right here at 2.13 inch-pounds. So if you go to the red, you can see the little red right here on the end. What I'm going to do is I'm going to the yellow, which here is the yellow. It's even harder to see, but you can see that little bit of yellow right there. That's the stiffest one they make. I'm going to take and put this spring here all the way around my car, along with the 50 weight that I used all the way around my car. And now we're going to go ahead and set the preload on it and see what happens. When you're putting your spring back on, one of the tips I would recommend is go ahead and take your adjuster nut and screw that all the way up to the top. And when you're doing this, make sure that you don't unscrew the lower half of your body here where the seals are, or the top half where the cap is you just put on. So screw that up to the top. What that's going to do, when you pull the shaft out all the way, it's going to make it a little bit easier to get your spring on because it's not as compressed as much. So it makes it a little bit easier to get that spring on there. And then go ahead and put your spring retaining clip back on. And make sure that the spring goes over the clip the way it's supposed to. There's a little notch right there it's supposed to go on. Then there's also a little notch right here where this rod end, where that cap goes into, or that retainer clip goes into, I'm sorry. Once you get that on there, all you got to do is go ahead and screw your Allen back in here. And once again, remember that is a metal bolt going into plastic, so don't strip it out, just go snug. All right. So there we go. We have one finished shock. Let's go ahead and do the rest of them, and then we're going to put them back on and set our preload. All right, so something I wanted to point out here when you're putting it back together, if you'll notice right here, there's 5 holes on the upper mounting bracket for your upper bolt for your shock. Now, these 5 holes, there's 3 on the top and 2 on the bottom. So if you take, and by the way, your shock is mounted in the center on the top stock. If you wanted to drop it down to one of the lower holes, what this is going to do is it's going to drop your shock down by 1/8 of an inch, which is going to increase your body height by 1/8 of an inch. So maybe that's something else you want to do to get a little bit more lift or clearance here, depending on the size of your tires and what you're trying to do. Now, if you'll notice, it's also got a left and a right. So this is for you to basically, what you're trying to do essentially, guys, is you're trying to keep your wheel centered in this wheel well. Okay, you don't want it off to the back, you don't want it off to the front, you want it centered. So whatever you need to do for the adjustments that you've made, you need to adjust this as well to try to keep the wheel in the center. That's basically what that's there for. There's a lot of other aftermarket shock towers out there which have, wow, they've got like 20 holes in them, so you've got a lot of adjustment. But this is what Axial left us with stock. I think it works pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and use the lower one, and I'm moving it to the front. That's what I needed to do to try to keep my wheel centered in the wheel well. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and set our preload and our sag. And by general rule of thumb, sag should be 1/3 of your total suspension travel. Now what that means is we're going to find a fixed point back here, like on the top of my bumper is what I'm going to use, and we're going to go ahead and pick this up so the tires aren't coming off the ground, but the suspension is maxed out. And then we're going to measure from our fixed point on the top of the bumper down to the table, and we're going to write that measurement down. Next, I'm going to go ahead and compress this all the way to bottom the compression or the suspension out. And then we're going to go from the same fixed point on the bumper down and measure that. The sag should be 1/3 of the total suspension travel. So let's go ahead and do this with a tape, which is all you need. And when I'm showing it to you, it might be a little bit easier to understand. So what we're going to go ahead and do here is take a tape, like I was saying. We're going to put it up against the bumper because I'm going to use my fixed object as the very top of the bumper here. So I got my tape up against it. I'm going to go ahead and pick up my vehicle to the point where the suspension is totally uncompressed. I don't want the wheels to come off the ground. You want them to stay on the ground. You just want the suspension to uncompress. And if you could see there, it says 5.5 inches. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and let it decompress, and I'm actually going to push down on this to compress my suspension all the way. Now it is reading 3.5 inches. So there is 2 inches of travel in my suspension total. So what I need to do is take 1/3 of that 2 inches of travel, and that should be my sag. So we know that we have 2 inches total suspension travel. So how do we figure out what 1/3 of that is? Well, what you do is you take 2 point and you divide that by 3 point, which is going to give us 1/3. So 1/3 of 2 inches is 0.666666, a million sixes. Anyway, you know that 0.50 would be 1/2 inch. So 0.666 is pretty close to about 5/8 of an inch, give or take a little bit. So that's what we want to do, is get our suspension to sag 5/8 of an inch at rest. This is what we're going to do that. So we're going to go ahead and check that again now. So if we were at 5.5, which we still are, and I let this drop down, it comes down to almost 4.5. So we've got an inch of sag and we only want 5/8 of sag. So what we're going to do now is the adjustment nuts on the shock body, we're going to go ahead and turn them down to compress our springs a little bit more. And what that's going to do is make it a little bit stiffer and raise our sag back up. So go ahead and turn them down a little bit and make sure you do it equal on both sides, and then we'll go ahead and check it again. Okay, so we went ahead and turned our adjuster nuts down to compress the suspension. Let's see what we got now. So we put our tape up here again and lift it up again. Nothing's going to change here. We're still at 5.5. But when I drop it back down for the sag, look where we're at now. Just a hair less than 5, which if it went to 5, that'd be a 1/2 inch. We want to go just a little bit more. So I'm pretty close here. I'm at about 4 7/8. I'd say I'm pretty much right on cue. All right, so here you go. Here is my Jeep with the correct sag on it based with the weight that I have. And keep in mind, guys, this is kind of just a suggestion. It is a general rule of thumb that you need 1/3 of your total suspension to sag. Okay, but like I said, it's just a suggestion. You can do anything you want to. I wouldn't recommend taking your adjuster nuts all the way down to the end of the threads, but you could go pretty far. What that's going to do is put more compression on your springs, which will give you less sag or no sag, and it's going to lift your vehicle up a little bit. Maybe you need that extra clearance. Maybe you need it to be that stiff. If you have to take your adjuster nut all the way down to the end of the threads to get what you want, then what you really should be doing is upgrading your spring to a stiffer spring if there is one available. If that's not available, then you can go back to your shock fluid and go with a stiffer weight to get what you need. So this sag is based on all the weight in your vehicle, which I didn't tell you that when we were checking it, but when you're checking your sag, you want to have your battery in there, you want to have your body on, you want all of your accessories in here, any weights you have, maybe you've got all of your sandboards back here, your propane tanks, gas cans, I don't know what you have, but the more weight you put in this, you're going to have to adjust your preload nut to get the correct sag if that's what you want to do. So this is not a permanent thing. Every time you add weight or take weight away from your vehicle, if you want to keep the correct sag, you'll have to adjust your nut. Left and right should be exactly the same. Front and rear may not be the same. You might have more weight, more cargo in the back, so you have to turn these nuts up higher to get the correct sag, whereas in the front you don't. So that's kind of up to you guys, basically wherever you want to be with your suspension there. I hope I've helped you out and shown you a little bit of what's going on here. I believe this is going to conclude our video on suspension upgrades for our top 5 upgrades on the Axial SCX10iii and SCX10iii Gladiator. All right, well on that note, we're going to go ahead and wrap this video up. Once again, I really do appreciate the support. Thank you very much for watching. If you guys have any questions or anything, don't hesitate to ask me. They got that little comment section down below. Go ahead and comment in there if you have a question. I promise I will get back with you. It may not be right away, but I promise I will get back with you and try to answer your question to the best of my ability. Other than that, it's a great day here. You guys go have fun. Take this out, go crawl the hell out of it. Let me know if any of these upgrades have helped you so far. We got video number 5 coming up. I'm not going to tell you what it is yet though. Stay tuned. I'm Travis. You're watching Upgraded RC. Peace out.